What's up, everybody? Welcome back into Lettermen Row. Welcome to the Monday after Ohio State 41, Ohio State 30, the spring game. Kind of a weird way to put that, but that's what it was. Andy, we promised that we were going to be in the horseshoe for this thing. Mother Nature said, no, you won't. It is currently 45 degrees in Columbus, Ohio. It was raining just a little bit ago. Nasty weather. Weird, 80 degrees all week last week. You get on the other side of spring, and now that Ohio State football is gone, everybody just wants to be uh, I guess, gray and cloudy and sad that Ohio State spring ball's over. I'm gray and cloudy and sad that spring ball is over. I'm Spencer Holbrook. That's Andy Backstrom. This is the Monday After presented by Buyers Auto. So instead, we're online, we're on Zoom. We're going to talk about Ohio State spring game, and we're going to talk about the chief concern on both sides of the ball. Fairly obvious points, but I think they're worth diving into for, 10, 12, 15 minutes, however long we want to talk about them each. Andy, we're going to start on offense. Everyone knows what the concern is. Go ahead. Take it away from here.
Yeah, it's the offensive line. Everyone wants to talk about it as they should because it's arguably the most important position group outside of quarterback for an offense. And for Ohio State, they have to replace three starters up front that are all NFL hopefuls that will definitely hear their name called this month in Kansas City later this month. So it's a big need to address. And I think there were concerns that kind of flowed into the spring game that we saw, especially the tackles positions. It's Josh Fryer at left tackle, and then a mix between Zen Michalski and Tegra Chipola at right tackle. But even watching back the tape, I thought Carson Hinsman wasn't perfect either at center. I think it's easy to key in on the tackles, but Mike Hall Jr., he didn't show up a ton on the box score, but if you watch that tape back, he was kind of giving Carson Hinsman some trouble on the inside there too. I do think that Carson has more of a lead on that position at center. I think he should be okay there, but the tackles certainly are a concern going into what's really this next transfer portal window here. And you have to question, okay, what does Ohio State do? Do they trust the process here? Because they've talked about before with Paris Johnson that he wasn't fully there at left tackle last year. And of course, he was great. He was an All-American at left tackle last year. Now he's pretty much a lock to be a mid-first round pick in this coming draft. So, Spencer, what do you think in terms of the assessment right now? How necessary is portal watch?
Very, very, very necessary. I think Ohio State needs to go in the portal and make a splash with the tackles. The problem is you don't know who's going to be in the portal. You don't know who's going to go into the portal after you take a commitment from a portal guy. If Ohio State had a perfect world, they could sit back and just say, okay, everybody go in the portal, then we'll pick one of you. And that's just not how it works. But I think you've got to go in there. I think at this point you really need to find a tackle in the transfer portal if one is talented enough to help you. If one is not, and he's just going to come in and compete with Zen Michalski and Tegra Chipola for that right tackle spot, I don't think it's worth it. I think you should trust your development. But if there's a guy who stands out above the rest, if there's a guy who is a starter somewhere else and decides that he needs to move up and go to Ohio and go to a place like Ohio State and can play there, then that's fine. And Andy, I know that Ohio State's coaching staff said they weren't confident in Paris last year. Come on. Everyone knew what Paris was last year. Everyone knew
Yep.
Paris was going to be fine at offensive tackle. He started at guard. He was making the transition to tackle. Of course, there were some bumps along the way, but it was very obvious that Paris Johnson was going to be at least a serviceable left tackle, if not a generational left tackle for Ohio State. And that's exactly what he was. We're not talking about that here. They're not the same situations. And the talking point is fine. Like we trusted our development last year with Paris. It's not like you were going to bring a guy in to compete with Paris from the transfer portal last year at this time. And so I know that that's what was said. I understand that was the message, but also this is like apples and tomatoes here. It's way different circumstances. We saw Josh Fryer have his struggles. I still think he's further along in the development than both Tegra and Zen. I think if you're Ohio State, you either feel confident with the development of Josh Fryer at left tackle and you go out and find a right tackle, or if there's a guy who you truly feel like can be a first, second round pick at left tackle, you can try to put Fryer back on that right side. But there's definitely a concern there. I'm not concerned about Carson Hinsman. I think the natural development of him in his second year. I mean, in June will be the 1 year anniversary of him even showing up. And now we're talking about him as the starting center, or Jacob James, or maybe Victor Cutler. But there was a whole spring there. I just don't know if I see him being able to catch up to Carson Hinsman and then passing him as well as taking over for Jacob James. So I think that's going to be a two-man race. But as far as the offensive line goes, it is tackle, tackle, tackle. It's right tackle, right tackle, right tackle. The Buckeyes have to get that figured out. they absolutely have to get that figured out. And I think the portal is going to be necessary for them because, if they're, like I keep saying, if there's a guy who you think can elevate your offensive line in the transfer portal, then you go out and get him.
Yeah, and like I want to dispel this notion that like Kyle McCord played poorly in the spring game because again, I really recommend anyone watch back the tape. And it really doesn't take that much watching to see in the first half that he had to do a lot of moving around that pocket. I think there's this myth that he's some statue and that he can't move or he can't throw on the run, but some of his best throws, the drive where he had 3 throws from Marvin Harrison Jr., where Marvin kind of just got in there, got his work done, and got out. Pretty much every single one of those throws was Kyle moving outside of the pocket and hitting Marvin in stride. The one that wasn't was a 3rd and 8, and he did have a clean pocket, and his back was against the wall. It was almost from his own end zone. And he had a nice throw to Marvin near the boundary. And I think that's the flash that Ryan Day talks about with this offensive line. It's inconsistency. One moment it's there, one moment it's not. Of course, with the offensive line, you need 9 moments to be there and maybe one that's not. That's kind of what you're looking for from this group of 5. So half and half is no good. And certainly on that group of 3 throws, 1 of 3 is not what you're looking for. But I do think that is the flash, those kinds of plays. But there were so many others where Kyle had to be flushed out of the pocket and he was on the run and either threw it away because there was nothing there or he did find someone. I mean, the other one I'm thinking of is when he had to move the chains on 4th and 5 near midfield, and he's moving right and finds Caleb Brown to move the chains there. And that's another play where he's got Tyleik Williams coming off the edge and chasing him down, and he's making that throw. So again, 18 of 34 doesn't look great on paper, but if you're watching and seeing all the throws that he had to make where he's moving, I think you can start to understand why, okay, maybe that's why there's so many incompletions on paper.
Let's also not forget that Kyle McCord will be throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Xavier Johnson, maybe Carnell Tate, maybe a couple other guys. And instead, he was throwing to freshmen and second-year guys who aren't going to be on the field as much. Yeah, I definitely think that the offensive line was the chief concern there. I'm not really concerned about Kyle McCord's play. I actually was kind of impressed with him as the day went on, which we talked about in the rapid reaction presented by Byers Auto, that he got better as the day went on. But Andy, like at this point in spring, we watched enough of spring practice, and I'm grateful that Ohio State allowed us to do this. Like we didn't see anything out of the ordinary from this offense. Like we saw the offensive line struggle in spring practice throughout when we watched scrimmages. We saw Kyle McCord get better throughout as he went on through his days. Each time we were in there, he got better with each throw. We saw, the wide receivers put on a display. We saw some tight ends flash and be impressive. Like nothing that I saw surprised me on Saturday. And that's the thing about the spring game at Ohio State that maybe isn't at other places. A lot of other places you have to draw conclusions from this. I didn't draw any conclusions from Saturday. It was almost just, oh, this is a glorified scrimmage at the Woody that we got to watch 3 or 4 times this year. And now it just kind of almost confirmed the priors that we had heading in. Like I looked at my notes, the offensive line was the same in the spring game as it was during the March 25th spring scrimmage that we saw. And if Tegrit Shabola was the starter, it would have been the same as the one a week prior or a week later on April 1st that we watched. And so I didn't truly learn a ton, but I confirmed that I think Ohio State should go in the transfer portal if there is a player you truly believe can make a difference for you. If not, trust your development. Justin Fry is a developer of talent. Ryan Day and those guys in there recruit extremely well. They recruit on tools on the offensive line. They recruit on traits on the offensive line. You can get those tools and traits, put the talent with them, put the developmental path with them. You might have a right tackle. If not, go get one. And so I think that there's a huge if in there. But yeah, it's just interesting to me that this is what we're talking about when we were talking about the exact same thing on March 5th before spring ball kicked off.
Yeah, I think the most concerning thing for me is that it's one-on-one matchups. Like there's not a whole lot of scheme going on in these spring games. Yeah, you saw a few stunts here and there, but they weren't really blitzing. And so when you're looking at these flaws really on the offensive line, it's one-on-one, man blocking, and just errors in pass protection. I mean, JT Tuimoloau basically at times was mauling Josh Fryer off the edge and was getting pushed back, whether or not he gave up a sack or not. He was getting pushed back and back and back and didn't seem to have any sort of balance there. And then even on the other side, Jack Sawyer was beating Tegrit Shabola with speed. Even There was times where Tyleik Williams was coming on to the outside and getting past Zen Michalski. So like just speed and power seems to be a problem right now for those tackle spots. And that's just a pure, talent disparity. And I know you can point to Ohio State being like, well, the defensive line should be great. It has a chance to maybe even be historically great in terms of program standards with the defensive end pairing that they had, two guys that were former top 5 recruits in that 2021 class in JT and Jack Sawyer. But at the same time, it's not like everyone else in the Big Ten is a slouch. There are some good defenses. There are some good defensive lines. And if the end goal is to win a Big Ten championship and win a national championship, I mean, look at the Georgia defensive line that they had to face in the Peach Bowl. And luckily, they had a strong offensive line unit, and that's going to have 3 guys in the NFL from it. But if this offensive line right now, of course, they're not ready for a regular season game. But if they had to go up against Georgia, it wouldn't be pretty for sure. And that's, no one would really be pretty right now in that kind of situation. But the point is that there's so much growth that needs to be had. And I guess it's just a test of how much growth can happen from now until August and really September versus, do you need to go against someone else?
Yeah, they already added one. I mean, Victor Cutler came in, and you see that he's a good depth piece, I believe, because he's versatile, but he's not a starting level guy at Ohio State right now. And like you said, the defensive line won the day, obviously, which we're going to get into some defensive stuff here in just a minute. But the defensive line won the day, obviously. I think there's 5 sacks by 5 different players. Kenyatta Jackson, again, just showcase why he's one of those breakout guys who just keeps going like this. JT and Jack, you're not going to block those guys. That's the thing. But it is Ohio State, and you have to block those guys, because if you can block JT and Jack, you can block just about anybody in the country. Specifically JT Tuimoloau. If you block him, I think you're pretty much set against any other defensive end you're going to see in America. But that's not an excuse, and Ohio State doesn't want to use that as an excuse. You could chalk it up to, well, JT got the best of him, but every other guy in the country is a half second slower, so we should be okay there. That's not how this works at Ohio State. They want to show that they can block everybody. They want to show that they can dominate everybody on the offensive line. That's simply not happening right now. And so, the transfer portal is 2 days old right now. It's 2 days open. There's still, I think, 13 days for guys to get into that transfer portal. LettermenRow.com, the Lettermen Lounge, we're going to have a lot more about the offensive transfer portal because it's basically just tackle at this point. I don't know where else you would add. Maybe defensive tackle, maybe defensive end, if you really feel like there's a guy who's experienced enough to make a difference. But that would be almost like a luxury, maybe a cherry on top of that sundae. But the offensive line is not that. The offensive line would be like the ice cream, because you have to have it to even have the sundae, right?
Yeah. It's a good Tim analogy when Tim's not here.
You know what I'm saying. So anyway, that's the offense. I mean, you can only say it so many times. Ohio State needs a tackle. Ohio State should go into the transfer portal, in my opinion. Maybe in your opinion. Whether the Buckeyes absolutely agree with that or not remains to be seen. I was told, for what it's worth, by a couple people inside the building, they are always looking to upgrade talent on the offensive line. And so I think that is at least a little telling. So, Andy, defensively, there is one concern, maybe a few, maybe 11, maybe it's all 11 guys. I don't know. The one concern on this defense, according to Andy Backstrom and Spencer Holbrook, would be
the secondary, which might be a surprise to you because they played very well in the spring game. But I think it comes with a caveat. How well can they play against real competition, full live period, against the best wide receivers on an opposing team? Again, this was Ohio State without 3 of its top 4 wide receivers. And I get that Ohio State has one of the deepest, if not the deepest, wide receiver core in all of the country. And yes, Carnell Tate and Noah Rogers and all the rest of the guys there are quite talented, but you still have to keep that in mind when evaluating the secondary play of this past Saturday. As great as it was, this isn't necessarily the kind of people they're going to be guarding, even in practice coming up for fall camp. So, but I will say, one thing we're talking about with the offensive line is, yes, it can't be acceptable just to, lose against JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. I think one of the most impressive things about the secondary is that they've challenged Marvin Harrison Jr., and he's arguably the best wide receiver in the country. On the very first throw of the spring game, you see Kyle McCord look for Marvin Harrison Jr. towards the boundary, and there comes running Denzel Burke to challenge that. He could have sat on it. He could have played it easy and soft and tried to minimize the yards after the catch. But no, he challenged that throw and went out. And I thought that Denzel Burke played better than any other defensive player, even though he only had one pass breakup on paper. He had another that could have been credited to him downfield against Jaden Ballard. And I just felt like he was really on point, and he has been all spring. So again, not trying to take away from the secondary and what they did Saturday. That's not really about this at all. It's more about, can they keep this up? Because that was the big thing towards the end of last season. This pass defense was not acceptable in terms of being able to win a national title. Can they continue this success in the spring?
So here, Andy, how do I say this? Okay, let's take all 12 opponents Ohio State will play in the regular season, and then throw in a couple of the national championship contenders that the Buckeyes might see. Do any of them have a better receiving core? And this is not a joke. This is not me trying to be like, wow, Ohio State's amazing. Look at the job they're doing at wide receiver. But like Carnell Tate, Noah Rogers, Jaden Ballard, Marvin Harrison Jr. as the lead. The guys who played in the spring at wide receiver. Will Ohio State see a receiving core minus Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, and Xavier Johnson? Will Ohio State secondary see a receiving core this fall better than the guys they played this spring? Not better than what Ohio State has in the fall, but better than what Ohio State has in the spring. And I say that because we just talked about the offensive line, like you said. They're not going to go against a lot of guys better than JT and Jack, but they have to be better against them. Well, the corners were largely locking down the Ohio State wide receivers and this spring. And I'm not sure how much better competition they'll see on Saturdays compared to the second string batch of receivers we saw them go against in the spring for Ohio State. And so in the same vein of like, well, you can't make an excuse for this offensive line. Well, you can't make any excuse for the corners because there isn't one to be had. They were very good against this receiving core, and I'm not sure if they're going to see better receivers at any point on Saturdays other than maybe Michigan. Michigan has a good receiving core. I think that's it. Because I think all those other guys are starting for like Notre Dame. I think all those other guys are starting for probably Penn State. And so this secondary, I think, is a concern because you don't know how it's going to go against Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming and Marvin Harrison. But we know how it went against Carnell Tate and Jaden Ballard and Marvin Harrison, and it looked pretty good for the secondary.
Yeah, certainly. And I think I agree. Yeah, Penn State, you probably got to throw in there as well with Michigan as two of the squads to watch out for. Yeah. Right, for sure. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a reason why they recruit so well here. Brian Hartline and the success that he's had, it's just a pipeline year after year after year. And even second-year guys that felt like we're getting passed up by first-year guys, like Kojo Antwi had a strong end to the spring. So there's just so much depth in that wide receiver room. And I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, that is something to be talked about when evaluating the corner play of Saturday. I think it's more of just, we've talked about before that this corner group has been talented before, but it hasn't always lived up to it. And how can they get back to being like 2019? That's really the goal for this defense, right? It's to be a top tier defense to the point where, yes, the offense will score a lot of points, but you're going to need to win games where maybe the offense isn't having quite the success, or maybe you need that critical stop that they couldn't get in the fourth quarter against Georgia. So can these corners be locked down? Can Denzel Burke be a top 10 to top 20 pick in the NFL draft? You really want one of those guys on your outside corner. Is it Denzel Burke? Maybe Davison Igbinosun makes a rise at some point in the season. Maybe it's Jordan Hancock. I don't know. But if you're looking at the elite defenses, I mean, look at Georgia in that secondary. People have mixed opinions about Keely Ringo, but he's probably going to go in the first round of the draft. You typically look at these national championship winning teams, they have a corner or two that are locked down. Can Ohio State have a lockdown corner? I mean, from you, like, what do you think right now? Is Denzel Burke in line for that? Is Jordan Hancock, Davison Igbinosun, like, do they have that right now?
Yeah, well, it's tough to say because we didn't see them go against those first team batch of receivers, but like in the Big Ten, probably. So probably, I think Denzel Burke's taken a step forward, and he was largely a lockdown cornerback. There were, of course, freshman moments, but as a freshman, I always said, and you can go back to the tape in 2021, roll the tape, Lettermen Row in 2021. I was beating the drum that Denzel Burke was more impressive in 2021 than Derek Stingley was as a freshman in 2019, when everybody wanted to crown Derek Stingley as the #1 overall pick for any draft of all time because he was just so great at corner. Denzel as a freshman was just as good, if not better, than Derek Stingley. He was great. So, I mean, and then in the last year, he just kind of tapered off, and there was some injuries there, and there was some maybe focus issues or maybe some confidence issues there. And I think he's back to where he should be. And so in the Big Ten, I think he's a lockdown cornerback. Can Jordan Hancock be that? I don't truly know. I'm not ready to say that because I want to see him healthy and actually out on the field on a Saturday with the bright lights on to see what he can do for more than just some hamstring, added issues that he had last year. So, Davison Igbinosun, he was good for Ole Miss last year. I wouldn't call him a lockdown corner for Ole Miss last year, but he was also a freshman. Now he's got Tim Walton's system, and this defense should be better. And so the best pass coverage is a pass rush. And if Ohio State is doing what it does to the Ohio State offensive line, to other offensive lines, then I think the secondary will look like a lockdown secondary. And I think that goes to the safeties, that goes to the corners. Is Denzel Burke a lockdown? I guess short answer, TLDR, yes. I would say yes right now. But injuries happen and confidence issues happen and deep balls, that you don't break up that are caught by a Toledo wide receiver happen. We saw it last year in September. And so right now the answer is yeah, but you don't say that with 100% confidence, maybe like some people would. I wouldn't, at least.
You bring up a good point though, about like how much hand in hand the pass rush goes with the play of the defensive backfield, because yes, as we talked about, the offensive line struggled mightily because of the defensive line. And so how much is that factoring into the success of the secondary there because of how much Kyle McCord had to move, so much that Tristan Gebbia had to do outside of the pocket. So like how much is that factoring in? That's something also to consider when looking at how well those cornerbacks played. I think they'd still be doing better, but I think it's something to consider when we talk about the spring and maybe the improvement of that group. The other thing I wanted to talk about that extends into pass defense is we saw some linebackers and safeties involved in that category. CJ Hicks had a couple of passes that he broke up. Same with Sonny Styles. Both of them could have had at least one interception in that game. I mean, this is maybe not a concern for the coaches as much as the fans, but how do you get those two on the field? I mean, you had an opportunity to do so because it's a spring game, and especially at linebacker because Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers weren't available. But I mean, does that game on Saturday make you think, gee, they really got to find these guys away on the field?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and maybe that is a concern. It's like too many talented guys in that linebacker room. Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg are going to play. They are going to play. Tommy Eichenberg will be a preseason All-American for a lot of people. Steel Chambers will be preseason All Big Ten for a lot of people, including me. I will say that if I had a vote for preseason All Big Ten, put Steel Chambers in there. I think he's going to have a really good year. Then you got CJ Hicks, Gabe Powers, and I do not want to forget about Cody Simon. He looks like a completely different player. He looks very confident. He sounds very confident. He wants to be a leader. Like, that's 5 linebackers right there. Reed Carrico showed some promise this spring. I think he had a little bit better ending to the spring than maybe the beginning when Jim Knowles said that they were looking at it on special teams roles, and you kind of started to think, maybe he's getting squeezed out. I thought he ended the spring better. And so you've got a lot of guys in there that can break up passes, that can be athletic. You're getting more athletic as the years go on at linebacker. You're going to continue to see that with Arvo Reese coming in this 23 class. And so I think that it is a concern, but it's a good concern to have, right? You want to be able to say, like, well, how the heck do we get these guys on the field? You're saying the same thing about all these safeties. Well, how does this guy fit in? How does he get to play? Where does he go? Where's Jihad Carter going to play? If those guys are playing at this level and he's not in the starting lineup, you don't know. And so good concerns to have, I think, for this secondary. Even at corner, when we were talking about it, is it as good as we think it is? It's a good concern to have because at the baseline, the very base, you know that it's going to be good. But I think that we can say that the secondary will be good this year. Will it be great? I think that is what we want to get to.
Yeah, maybe that's the success of the spring, right? We're talking about 2 concerns for the defense that are based in good things, right? Can the corners keep this up? How can they find time for two really good second-year players? And I think that says a lot about a defense that coming out of the Peach Bowl when we were in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it was just so much concern about this defense. And there still is. There's still a lot of caution. Can they actually perform not only at the beginning of the season, but throughout the whole season? I mean, for a long time last season, it was talked about how much improved this unit was. And then, of course, things came crashing down that last month of the season, and plus the college football playoff game against Georgia. So I think that there's caution to be had, but there's a lot to be said about how there are encouraging signs on defense. But of course, with spring ball, encouraging signs on one side of the ball means maybe some discouraging signs on the other. And that's kind of what we talked about with the offensive line.
It's always the pool that Ryan Day has to navigate, the push pull here. It's like,
yep.
what do you do? Like, oh, the defensive line played great. Man, this offensive line needs work. Oh, the secondary is playing great. Is the second team wide receivers group good enough right now? Like, oh, the linebackers looked really good. Well, is our running game not clicking on all cylinders? Like everything you do, like Chip Trayanum's 65-yard touchdown run, that's great. Great, good blocking. Great scheme. I thought the execution of that was great, and Justin Fry and Brian Hartline kind of drew that one up pretty well. Where was the linebackers? Where's the fill? Where's the scrape from that backside linebacker? Former Ohio State linebackers probably watching that and wondering those same things. Safeties wondering where the help was, and then you say, well, what's wrong with the defense? Well, it's good offense too. So it's a push pull that Ohio State has to navigate here in the spring, and I'm sure that they would much rather be able to see it against different competition than just their own, so they don't have to just every time they cheer for something, they also have to jeer at something.
We're getting there. We're almost there. This is the first step. First step of the offseason is done. Now we wait, back with Mick Marotti, that they'll be going again with workouts, leadership structure, and trying to get back into better shape as ever for August and getting back into fall camp mode. But yeah, we're done. One rung. We got to get to the next one until we get to the season.
Plenty of coverage coming to LettermenRow.com. We don't take any off season. It is always the season at Lettermen Row for football. Ohio State coverage on the way at LettermenRow.com. Andy Backstrom, the 40-year vet Tim May, he's going to be there. He'll be back. We miss you, Tim. I'm Spencer Holbrook. Another Monday after in the books, presented by Buyers Auto. Great talking to Andy about the offensive line, about the secondary, just about the Ohio State spring game, chief concerns we have. All of that in the latest video. Come check it out at LettermenRow.com. $30 until September. That's a heck of a deal. You can get all of our coverage, all of us and Matt Parker, the recruiting guy, recruiting ace. We talk about Ohio State football all year long. We don't stop. We never stop. So until next time, that's Andy Backstrom. I'm Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We will see you back next time.